Hey friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Little Star and Sweet Dreams. So I've stamped those images out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers to match our new Hello Bluebird Color Challenge number 3. So I am starting out with some brown shades, and I went with some more reddish brown shades because those are represented in that color palette. So I went with E13, E15, E17, and E18, and that's what I'm going to use for my bears. So I started with the E18 and I'm using that to lay in my shadows on this first little guy. Since he's facing toward the right, I'm going to make his shadows much deeper on the left, so that way his face will be nice and highlighted. I did add just a little bit of shadowing on the right hand side to help him look nice and round. Then I'm coming in with the next shade, which is E17, and I'm going to begin to blend that out. Now normally you might only use 3 shades. I decided to use 4 in here because I really wanted that dark rich E18 for my darkest, but the E15, which is what I'm using now to pull the E17 further into the center, I felt like that would be too dark to be my highlight shade, so that's why I decided to add in the E13. It was too big of a jump for me from E17 to E13. So now I'm coming in with the E13, which will be my lightest shade, and I'm going to fill in the rest of his face except for the little muzzle. I'm going to leave that different so I can do like a two-toned look, but I'm going to fill in the little bit of highlights that's on the tops of his hands and his legs and his tail, and then also color in his belly. And it's not a perfect blend, so I am going to do a second layer off screen. I decided to do the second layer off screen today because I am doing both bears exactly the same, and I felt like that might just be a little bit too repetitive for you guys. And I wanted to try to keep the video at a reasonable length. So I'm going in now back to that E18 for this little guy, and I am going to reverse my shadows. So he's facing toward the left, but his head is almost turned straight on because it's turned toward the side, which is now forward for us. So he has equal shadows on both sides of his face, but then when I get to his body, the shadows are more deep on the right hand side. And I did not add any shadows to his belly because I wanted that area to be lighter, just like it is on the first bear. So I blended out the E18 with the E17, and now I'm coming in with the E15, just like I did with the other guy, bringing that color in toward the center. And I'm filling in his arms and his little foot there because they're kind of tucked up under his body, so they wouldn't really get much of a highlight there. And then I just brought that color down on his belly. And then I'm going to switch to the E13 to finish off his little face, just really scrubbing over the previous shade to pull that color into the lightest so that I get a nice smooth blend there. And now you can see I've added on a second layer so those colors are much deeper and more saturated. And now I'm working on the muzzle using E31 and E33. I wanted something that would kind of transition from the previous brown tones that I'd had, but still stand out a bit. So now moving on to the birds, and I wanted them to represent the aqua tones in that color palette. So I went with BG10, BG11, and BG13. And I used that BG13 on the back of the head and the bottom of the wings and tail. And then I'm blending that forward with the BG11. And then once I'm done with that, I'm going to use the BG10 to fill in the face. I'm going to leave a little bit of that belly to be blank for now so I can add a little bit of a contrasting color. Then I'll bring in R11, R20, and R22. I'm going to use the R22 to add some rosy cheeks to my bears. It doesn't show up real well on that first layer, but I'm going to go back and do a little bit of a thicker coat on that. I blended out the edges of that with R20 and also colored in the insides of their ears. And then I use the R20 and R11 on the birds to give them some rosy cheeks and a little red breast. And for their beaks, I wanted something that would kind of bridge the gap between the pinks and the browns, so I went with YR18 because it's more of a dusty orange. For the little pail of stars, I decided to do that in a dark blue to represent the dark blue in that color palette for the challenge. This is also going to match the sky that I'm going to do in my background. I chose B24, B36, and B39. So I put the B39 on the outside edges, blended toward the center with the B37, and then used the B24 in the center. I felt like that B37 got pushed back a bit, so I added a tiny bit more of that, and then went over the edges of that with the B24 once again. For the moon and stars, I wanted to pull in the cream tone that is in the color challenge. So I went with E40, E41, and E42. So I'm starting with the E42 on my moon and just adding a little bit of shadow to the right hand side and then a little more heavy-handed down at the base of it, and then blending out that with the E41, and then I'll add a bit of the E40 in there as well. And then I am going to grab my colorless blender just to help smooth that E40 into the white cardstock. And then I'm also going to use these shades to color in the stars. So I'm just adding a touch of the E42 first, and then the E41, and then the E40, and let that fade into the white. And then the colorless blender to just smooth the transition. And I did actually stamp down some extra stars and colored them exactly the same, which you'll see later on. It was a little bit of a change to the card, but for now I'm going to move on to my clouds, and I'm going to go back to my BG10, which was my lightest shade for the birds, and just add a little bit of highlight here and there, more heavy-handed on the bottom of the clouds, but I'm also going to add some at the top and where those artist drawn lines are to make them look nice and fluffy. And that color is so pale that I really didn't even need to use the colorless blender to kind of help that fade into the white. I just left it as it was with the one layer of the BG10. And then once I finish up this last cloud, I'm going to trim all of these images out with their coordinating dies. For the background, I'm taking a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock and I'm going to blend on some Distress Oxide inks. I'm starting in the center with Salvage Patina, and I'm putting that on in kind of like an oval shape in the very center. I want my sky to incorporate both the aqua blue and the dark blue that is in this color challenge palette. So next I'm switching to Salty Ocean, and I'm going to pull that color in from all the sides, just bringing that color right up to where I have the Salvage Patina in the center, not really overlapping just yet. I wanted to have the heavier color applied on the outside edges, and then once some of that ink was kind of brushed off of the ink blending tool, I brought that right up over the edge of the Salvage Patina, and then I went back to my Salvage Patina ink blending tool to help smooth out that transition. It doesn't have to be perfect yet because there's going to be more colors applied and I'll have to work my way back down at the end, but just trying to get it as smooth as I can for now. Then I'm going to darken that up even further using some Blueprint Sketch. So I'm going to just pull that in from the outside edges once again, but not going quite as far as I did with the Salty Ocean, as I want to keep that kind of transition of color to color on the center of that panel. So just adding that color in, making sure that I really darken up those edges so it's going to pull focus toward the center of the card, and just making sure that I have an even application on there. So once I have that done, I'm going to come back in with the tool for my salty ocean and smooth that transition. I'll also go back to the salvage patina in the center. So the Distress Oxides are all about the blending. So then I'm going to take my last shade, which is Black Soot, and this one I'm going to use really sparingly on the very edges, and that's just going to deepen those up even further and give me that really dark look of a nighttime sky. So I'm just coming in on all four corners, bringing that color in a little bit, and adding that, and that is going to blend with that blueprint sketch and just make the most gorgeous dark sapphire blue shade once I get all done. So I'm just adding that to the last corner, and then I'm going to bring that up the right hand side a bit, and then I can start to work my way back down again in reverse. So now I'll come in with that blueprint sketch, smoothing out that black soot, and then always working my way back to the center again, so going back to the salty ocean, and then once I'm happy with that, going back to the salvage patina one last time. And then once I'm finished with that, I decided not to do any ink splatters today, but I am going to do some kind of metallic splatters. I have this pearlized shade here that I'm going to add, that's the Gansai Tambi Starry Colors. So I'm adding that all over the background. And then I also took this really pale gold shade because it reminded me of like that creamy color that I did with the moon and stars. So I added some little dots of that as well. So I have a nice starry sky. And then I'm going to set this panel aside to dry. For my sentiment, I wanted to heat emboss that. So I'm using some Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink that works great for embossing. Before I stamp that down, I'm going to use my Rabbit Hole Designs powder tool to just remove any static cling from that background. And then I'm stamping down the sentiment twice, just making sure to use light pressure. And then I'm going to coat that in some liquid platinum embossing powder. So I'm just going to sprinkle that over the sentiment so that it grabs a hold of that powder, tap off any excess from the back, and then I will heat set that with my heat tool. So I just heat it off to the side for about 30 seconds, and then I like to bring it to the back first to eliminate any warping, and then you can see as that starts to melt, it gets super shiny and beautiful. And once that's cooled down, I will use a microfiber cloth to remove any remaining powder. Then I'll pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using a piece of Lawn Fawn speckled eggshell cardstock and stamping in Lawn Fawn mermaid ink. I'm using a sentiment that is from Little Star and then another little bear from Word Buddies Woodland, and just stamp that down a few times to make sure I had a nice impression. And now I can start my assembly. So I'm going to use my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue to adhere this panel down to my card front. And by the way, I had planned to use the Starry Sky die to cut out all the little stars on the background, but I wasn't sure where I would put my sentiment in that case because it would cut out little stars where I wanted my sentiment to go. So I decided to change that up, and that's why I did stamp and color some additional stars, but I had already shown how I colored them in the video, so I just left that part out. Now I'm ready to begin adhering my images. So I started with the moon up in the top right corner, and now I'm taking one of the little clouds and tucking in that little pail of stars into the little slit that the die cuts in that cloud, and just gluing that into place so that I have it right where I want it, and then I have some foam tape on the back of the cloud to pop that up and give it a bit of dimension. And I wanted to add another strip once that pail was attached to just support that as well. So I'll just line that up at the bottom of the moon and get that situated. Press that down into place. Then I've got a second cloud here, and I'm going to stagger that one over on the left-hand side, right above the sentiment, and that is where my bear is going to go. So I'm adding some foam tape behind his head and that little star, and then I'll use liquid glue to adhere the rest of his body that is going to overlap the cloud. I love him so much. I think he's so darling. And then the third cloud I'm going to put over on the right again, right next to the sentiment. So just getting that position just how I want it. I wanted it to be about the same distance from the edge as the moon is above. And then I'm going to put the sleeping bear on top of that cloud, and I just added a little piece of foam tape to the top of his head that would be hanging over top of that. Both of the birds I'm adhering with liquid glue because they're going to be completely on top of the clouds. So I have one little bird facing toward the right that's going to go in front of the little bear with the star, and then the other one is going to go up by the moon. And then I have two larger stars that are almost as big as the one that the bear has on the string. I could only find the one at first. It's there in the little dish, but I couldn't find it. So I just moved on to some of these smaller stars. So just adding some glue here and there and filling in that sky wherever I think they should go. This little one kind of got stuck underneath that cloud, so I just used the end of my cutter bee scissors to reposition that where I wanted it. And then I'm just continuing to add those stars and just make the sky look nice and bright. Especially most of the stars are kind of more concentrated in the lighter part of the scene, as if the sky is kind of lit by the moon and those stars. But I did add a few into the darker area as well, just to kind of spread those stars around, because it draws your eye, around the scene a little bit more. So two of the stars stay connected, but I decided to cut them apart because I wanted to use them in more places. So I would have 4 instead of just 2. So I just used my cutter bee Teflon coated scissors to snip those apart real quick and easy. And that way I can kind of spread them around the scene even more. So I'm just going to continue filling in the rest until I have the scene to where I like it. So as I mentioned, this is for the Hello Bluebird Color Challenge, and if you'd like to enter, it starts today, June 7th, and runs through June 21st. All you have to do is upload a project using Hello Bluebird stamps on Instagram with the hashtag Hello Bluebird Color Challenge 3, and you can see that written out at the bottom of the Color Challenge photo that I shared at the beginning of the video. Also, you can find all the information plus more photos from the design team to inspire you on the Hello Bluebird blog. So I'm just finishing up this card by adding some Stardust stickles to the moon and stars to give them a bit of sparkle and shine. And then I'm going to pick that up and tip it into the light so you can see all of that detail with the Ganside Tambi Starry colors and the embossing powder. And then there's another peek at the inside. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. I post new ones every Monday and Friday, and occasional bonus videos like this one. All of the products I used will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below the video. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.